Horizon Jams, home CG reaction. This is 450 Marines versus the Imperial Japanese Navy. Wake Island. This was a Federation. I'm guessing this is Wake Island from World War II. I'm pretty sure I've seen him mentioned in multiple videos, so this is going to be interesting. Yeah, I like Federation talking about stories of things, like badass stories and some impossible, mission impossible type stories of the real world, which is like every time you hear it is insanity. Too many, let's just say, scripts that writers can create and movies that they can make, but no, apparently they don't want to do that. They just want to like remake shit. That's it. Safety. That's what they need. Yeah, the movie from 1990 worked, so it's gonna work now too. So let's just remake it. Or like Godzilla versus Kong or something. Like I guess that works. They're not gonna make shit like this. So yeah, it's gonna be very interesting. Obviously, this is gonna be from World War II, Imperial Japanese Navy. Some badass heroic story of 450 Marines repel or like hold on the position or something. Yeah. That's what it's on. Remember, we'll flag my next one, don't forget to subscribe. So that way I know which type of videos to react to more. I've been watching Federation videos a lot, and other task and purpose and things like that. If you haven't seen those, check out the link in the description. I think I just posted, I posted before this, the T90M versus Bradley video from Task and Purpose. So if you haven't seen that, check out the link in the description on the end of the video end card. And yeah, let's do it.
During World War II, the Japanese military used to think that the Marines were all recruited from prisons and insane asylums, which, to be honest, it's always made sense to me, but after researching for this video, it's starting to make dollars. Today we're talking about the first time that the United States Marine Corps would come toe-to-toe with the Japanese military. Ladies and gentlemen, Wake Island, a small coral atoll 2,000 miles west of Hawaii, closer to Japan than it was to America, and highly sought after by the Japanese to be a forward operating base for World War II. The only problem with that was, it was currently held by the Americans. 450 Marine Corps artillerymen and 1,200 civilian construction workers, as well as 70 Navy corpsmen. In this context, for the layman, if you don't know, Navy corpsman is a fancy word for Marine Corps medic, aka Doc. And they didn't have much to defend the island with, but they did have 6 5-inch coastal artillery guns that were actually taken from America's first ever battleship, the original USS Texas from the 1800s. They also had 12 3-inch anti-aircraft guns, 18 M2 Browning machine guns, 30 Browning 30 caliber machine guns, as well as 12 Grumman F4F Wildcat fighters. In regards to...
I like that video I watched about weapons from the mod that's still working. What are they? John Browning just with the hat and everything, just like the machine gun. Yeah, that makes sense.
Time, Wake Island is 22 hours ahead of Hawaii, meaning that from their perspective, Pearl Harbor would take place on December 8th, 1941. An hour after the attack on Pearl Harbor had ended, Wake would receive a transmission saying that Pearl Harbor had occurred and that they needed to be prepared. 2 hours after that, 27 Japanese bombers would conduct an air raid on Wake Island, destroying 8 of their 12 F4F Wildcat fighters before they even left the airstrip. At this point, 400 civilian construction workers would volunteer to help fight if it came to that, and the Marines began training them on how to operate machine guns immediately, while also fortifying fighting positions. Wake Island would then be bombed again on the 9th, and on December 11th, 1941, an entire Japanese naval detachment would arrive at Wake Island, and the battle for Wake would officially begin. As the Marines, the Navy corpsmen, and the construction workers rushed to their battle stations, they would see that they were incredibly outmanned and outgunned. The Japanese had brought with them 3 light cruisers, 6 destroyers, 3 submarines, 1 submarine tender, 2 PT boats, and 2 amphibious landing ships equipped with 450 special naval landing forces of the Japanese, which is essentially the Japanese equivalent of Marines. As the entire Japanese naval detachment advanced closer and closer to the island, they would finally come within striking distance of the Marine artillery, 12,000 yards. Despite that, and much to the confusion of the Marines, they were all ordered to hold their fire, which made absolutely no sense to them. These men could hit bullseyes at 12,000 yards. These guys would put a fucking 5-inch shell through a bedroom window if they wanted to. Why on earth are they being told to hold their fire? But the man in charge of the Marines, Commander Devereaux, realized that the Japanese artillery on the ships actually outranged the Marine artillery and they weren't firing yet. And this must mean that the Japanese thought that their air raids had disabled all of the Marine defenses on the island, which was not true at all, because in reality the only thing they had taken out was the original 8 Wildcats from day one. So under the command of Major Devereaux, the Marines would continue to hold their fire and play possum as the entire detachment advanced closer and closer. 10,000 yards, 8,000 yards, 6,000 yards. 4,000 yards, which as far as a Marine artilleryman is concerned, is point blank fucking range. If they got any closer, these Marines were going to try to put a bayonet on this 5-inch gun, okay? The Marines would finally be given the order to open fire, and they would open fire with everything they had and put as many shells downrange as they possibly could, taking the Japanese completely off guard and hitting almost all of their ships with effective fire. In a matter of minutes, they were able to sink one of the destroyers by hitting it twice in its magazine. The destroyer Hayate would be sunk in 12 minutes. And I cannot stress to you what a big deal this is. At this point in time, Japan has effectively attacked Pearl Harbor and 27 other locations in the Pacific, and they have never lost a single naval vessel. And it took the Marine artillerymen 12 minutes to put one completely under the waterline. Panicking and not knowing what to do, the Japanese Navy...
Okay, Japanese Navy was really OP, right? During the Pearl Harbor times, like very early on, before you guys adjusted, obviously, like they do usually. And 27 different locations aside from Pearl Harbor, and they like never lost a ship, a destroyer or whatever, right? Like a Marines, like, well, they think our weapons are disabled. Let them come closer, come closer. And obviously, there's like two elements to this. First of all, obviously, Marines can shoot really accurately, but Japanese Navy also thinks that they don't have the artillery, otherwise they would have just like attacked by now. So they're just chilling there. They're not ready, right? So it was literally a surprise attack. So, they just panic at what to do now, and they just keep getting attacked. So best scenario ever.
Naval detachment would turn and retreat. And it is at this point that they would realize that they made a fatal flaw in their attack strategy because they didn't bring a carrier and they brought no planes for air support. Cue this man, Henry Elrod, aka Hammer and Hank, and one of the first main characters that would ever enter the battlefield in World War II on America's behalf. Himself and the other 3 Grumman Wildcat fighters would take off into the sky. They would realize that the Japanese naval detachment came with no carrier and no airplanes overhead, and let's face it, Japanese AA guns might as well be crewed by fucking stormtroopers because they can't hit shit. So the 4 Wildcat pilots take off and proceed to kick the entire naval detachment in the ass on the way out as they strafe their decks with machine gun fire and drop 100-pound bombs on their decks. Now, a 100-pound bomb and machine gun fire absolutely should never be able to sink a major naval vessel, like ever. Good old Hammer and Hank, though, managed to park one of those 100-pound bombs directly on top of the depth charges on top of the deck of the destroyer Kisarage, setting off a chain reaction that would sink the entire
You're kidding me.
vessel, which is literally the equivalent of killing a grown-ass man with a BB gun, but somehow he pulled it off anyways. Which, I mean, to be fair, is just standard behavior for the Marine Corps at this point. Now, the smoke cell...
The Marine Corps was like protagonist from Call of Duty or something. Oh, it's not about if you can take that out or not. You can't. But just the right shot, if you know where to hit it, you can do it. And they do that every time, apparently. That's the case. That's insane.
Battle, and they have to figure out what all happened because, there's a lot of moving parts. Come to find out, the only thing that the Marines lost, 2 of the planes were so damaged that they weren't going to be flyable anymore. So now they're only down to 2 Grumman Wildcats, and only 5 people had been injured. Nobody died on the American side. Japan, on the other hand, had lost 2 destroyers, a submarine, and a suspected 300 plus men. Needless to say, the Japanese are fucking pissed and embarrassed about this entire thing, which, I mean, they kind of have a right to be upset too. I mean, this was the first 2 ships they've had sunk during World War II. This was the first tactical loss they've had, and this is the only successful amphibious landing defense using coastal artillery ever in all of World War II. They straight up kind of got their asses whooped. And because they're so upset, they pretty much immediately sent out another air raid from the Marshall Islands and bombed Wake Island again, and they continued to bomb Wake Island every day for the next 10 days. Thankfully, they still didn't manage to hit a whole lot. Total stormtrooper energy, just misses every single time. And during this 10 days, the American people would find out...
Okay, Japanese Navy for Wake Island at least have like a... just saying advantage is understatement. They are like the most power in this way, right? Because they can just go back and just like bomb the shit out of the place, retreat and try to attack again because this island is closer to Japanese area than the American one, right? So they basically bombed the shit out of this island for 10 days and didn't hit anything important. How the fuck that happens? Like, you're such an OP position right now. You have such a support. You can basically just wait out and just bomb the shit out of everything and just like, sit there. You have your position is at that level. Basically a position of like a really powerful country versus something that is not in this way, I guess. I don't know, because of the Wake Island obviously being closer to Japan, right? And obviously like the surprise attack at Pearl Harbor basically at least psychologically like stunted USA in a way. And obviously I'm guessing USA at this point weren't aggressive naval wise like Japan was, if Japan basically attacked 27 locations without having a single ship getting destroyed. So with all this OPness going in Japan's side, they still didn't attack anything important. How that happened?
Out that 450 Marines and a bunch of construction workers stood up to the Japanese Navy and told them to get fucked, and this became the silver lining for the catastrophe that was Pearl Harbor. Wake Island was a shining example that the American public looked to and said, if those 450 dudes were able to accomplish that when they weren't ready, imagine what we're going to be able to do once we actually start trying. This victory, unfortunately, would be short-lived because it is now a race between Japan and America to see who can get reinforcements to Wake Island first. The problem with that is the Japanese reinforcements are coming from all their other successful attack missions, including Pearl Harbor, so they have a huge head start on the Americans. So obviously they get all of their ships there first. So the Marines call up the Navy chain of command and are like, hey, there's a bunch of more Japanese ships here, including some aircraft carriers. Hurry up. At which point, the United States Navy, or maybe not the Navy, but the government, somebody at a high level decides that, well, we don't want to lose any more ships, so we're just going to consider all of Wake Island collateral damage, and we're going to leave all of you there to die. I wish I was joking. So the first battle for Wake Island was on December 11th. They then got bombed every day for 10 days straight. It is now...
Oh my god, that is so fucked up, right? But if was Wake Island surrounded by the place that already fell by Japanese, like 27 places that he's talking about, right? That's the problem. See, I've said that in the past. It's different to be there and do things, and different to be in a war room and seeing a paper and a map and like all the dots. These two scenarios are always different, right? I mean, you can say like, okay, whoever saw the dot is evil piece of shit. But he's seeing the dot in like a larger picture, and he's seeing things as like, oh, this is lost, that is lost, how to win the war. You can kind of see that point of view. But in the end, still those are human people. You're still sacrificing 500 people there, right? So it's like, if you see both sides, it's like dilemma type of shit, right? So I don't know, was this surrounded by 27 different places that were fell, and they decided like, even if we send reinforcement, it's not going to be enough. We're still going to lose places. There's no saving Wake Island. But even then, like, couldn't you send some boats to, I don't know, take the 450 men out of Wake Island and back to like United States? At least you could have done a rescue mission, right? If you think like Wake Island's lost, at least do the rescue mission. I don't know. If you just like, oh, all those 500 people are gone too, that's kind of like piece of shit type of behavior.
December 22nd, they have all been left there to die, except these are United States Marines, so fuck it, we're still gonna fight anyways, because that's just how they get down. So December 22nd, 1941, the second battle for Wake Island is about to kick off. In the red, white, and blue corner, we have 450 Marine artillerymen, 400 construction workers, and 70 Navy corpsmen, going toe-to-toe with a reinforced Japanese Navy of 3 light cruisers, 6 destroyers, 2 PT boats, 2 amphibious landing vehicles, a bunch of more amphibious landing soldiers, 1 submarine tender, 2 submarines, 4 heavy cruisers, 2 mine layers, and 2 aircraft carriers returning from Pearl Harbor, the IJN Hear You and the IJN See You. Apparently the IJN Smell You and Taste You were fucking busy. And now, to the Marine Corps' surprise, the entire naval detachment refuses to get anywhere near this island, not willing to come within 12,000 yards because they don't want to get shot up by accurate Marine artillery fire again. So instead, what they do is they send out their 2 amphibious landing ships with 900 soldiers on them, and they deploy every single plane that their aircraft carriers have. The 2 remaining Marine Corps Wildcat fighters are about to go toe-to-toe with 50 Japanese aircraft. And somehow, those 2 badass Marine aviators managed to shoot down 21 Japanese planes. One of which was the bomber of Bombardier Norobu Kanai, the man that was credited with sinking the USS Arizona. This would be considered the first ever revenge for Pearl Harbor. The remaining Japanese planes then proceeded to bomb and strafe the island with machine gun fire. They didn't really do a whole lot of damage, but one thing...
50 planes, right? And Marines have 2. It's like, yeah, we're taking half of them with us. Like, what the fuck?
They did take out was the communication lines leaving the command bunker where Major Devereaux was. And nobody knew that that had happened, so Major Devereaux's inside of his bunker giving orders, but nobody's hearing them. So when the 900 Japanese Special Naval Landing Forces landed on the beach and they weren't given any orders, the Marines are kind of like, what are we doing? What's the play? No orders came through, so they're gonna do what Marines do best, be default aggressive and go fuck shit up. Given a lack of instruction, they will resort to destruction every single time. The Marines on their own accord decide that they are going to fix bayonets, leave the machine guns and fortified fighting positions with the civilians that they trained, and they are gonna go meet a 2-to-1 battle against the Japanese Special Landing Forces on the beach in the middle of bumfuck nowhere in the Pacific. One of these two groups is the best amphibious.
I mean, look, in any day of the week, when your odd is 2 against 1, you're like, oh my god, that's fucked up. Everything I heard so far is like, 2 against 1, that's better than what you had before. You just sank 20 planes with 2 when there was 2 versus 50. Even before that, like, everything is so against the odds. 2 versus 1, maybe that would work. That's what I'm thinking now.
Fighting force on Earth, and they are about to figure it out right now. For the next 11 hours, the Marine Corps and the Japanese Special Landing Forces would engage in close combat, and not only were the Marines successful at defending, they would begin launching counterattacks, and these counterattacks would fracture the enemy line, sending small groups of enemy soldiers all over the island. It is at this point, after like 11 hours, Commander Devereaux finally comes out of his fucking bunker after not hearing from anyone this entire time, and in his head, he's thinking all of the positions that had radios must have been overrun. That's why they're not responding to me, so he's anticipating that they're losing. And as soon as he walks out of the bunker, he sees Japanese flags all over the island. And he assumes that the flags had been hoisted because the Japanese were victorious. But that's not what was happening. What he was seeing was Japanese good luck flags, which was a Japanese tradition in World War II, where the Japanese soldiers would have their friends and family sign a Japanese flag, and they would hang it on their rifle when they went into battle for good luck. That is what he was seeing, not flags hoisted in victory, because his Marines were kicking their fucking ass. But he didn't know that, so he proceeded to go around the island and force his men to surrender. Right off the bat, huge problem. The Japanese at this point in time weren't real big on the whole taking prisoners thing. They still very much believed in...
I'm sorry, like, understand that, but still the kind of like weird leadership, right? You just see a flag and that's enough for you to think that Japanese have won. So basically, even if Japanese had done that as a smart move, it would have worked, is what you're saying? If Japanese were just like, oh, I don't know, like, fly our flag, and they'll, the command will be mistaken, like, we won, and he'll surrender. Like, that's kind of like a weak ass move. You need to see it better, like, investigate, like, is your people dead? Is Japanese surrounding the area? What is happening? Just flag is enough? Come on.
In the Bushido Code of Honor, and if you surrendered on the battlefield, you lost that honor, and as far as they're concerned, if you didn't have your honor, you deserve to die. So it's already not looking that great, and it would become even worse once the fog of the battle finally lifted, and everybody began to look around and realize there's a distinct lack of dead Americans. Plenty of dead people, not many Americans. Because over the last 11 hours, the Japanese landing forces had suffered 600 casualties, and the Americans had only lost 52 Marines and 70 construction workers. I say only, that's still a lot, it's way too...
So Americans were outnumbering them. If 600 died out of 900, and Americans only lost 50 or something, which means Americans were more than Japanese now.
Many. It's tragic. I'm not trying to diminish that in any way. I'm simply trying to explain it was an extremely lopsided battle.
Compared
and this
to
would only serve to infuriate the Japanese even more. So the Japanese, now thoroughly pissed off, decide they are going to take every American on Wake Island, including the civilians that didn't even fight, and strip them all butt naked and tie them together in groups of 15 with telephone wire and march all 1,600 of them to the airfield. They then began assembling their crew-served machine guns, intending on executing everyone. They then stood there for 2 days on an airstrip, butt naked in the middle of the Pacific, at gunpoint, until the Japanese admiral came out and announced to them that the Emperor of Japan had decided to grace them with their lives. You see, the American media had made such a big deal of the first defense of Wake Island that the entire world was watching the events unfold now, and Japan knew that they couldn't get away with committing such a mass atrocity without attracting too much attention. So
so if there were no tents and they would have killed those people, Americans, what Americans wouldn't have caught the eyes of the world? Like, holy shit, Japan just killed, massacred like 400 Americans now, and civilians too. Even if the eyes weren't there, it would have been eventually there. Those are Americans, come on. When it comes to media, anything happens in America, even back then, it's just like would have caught eye. At least European eyes, come on.
They decided they were going to actually have to abide by the rules of war and take prisoners. The majority of the Americans would then be loaded onto cargo ships and sent to prison camps either in Japan or Japanese-occupied China. And I'm happy to say that the overwhelming...
This is pissing me off. For one leader who's such a moronic didn't realize that those flags are not really means victory. Marines were kicking ass. and they had to surrender and all this shit happened. That is insanity, man. One mistake, or look at the Japanese one, so everybody surrender. I get it, like leadership role is hard. You have to think about your man, but what the fuck, man? Just seeing one flag is like, oh, we lost, even though they were by now outnumbering the Japanese.
Majority of them survived all of World War II in these POW camps and got to return home in 1945 and 1946. Upon returning home, they would find out that only months after their first defense of Wake Island, in 1942, Hollywood had turned their life events into a movie. But the problem with the movie was that nobody actually knew what happened at the Second Battle of Wake Island, so Hollywood just anticipated that everybody had died, and that's how the movie ended. Fast forward like 45 years later, there's a Wake Island reunion event where a journalist finally asks all the Marines what they thought of that movie when they first returned home. And without skipping a beat, this man in his 60s or 70s at this point chimes in and says, well, first of all, we didn't actually have a dog there. To which every other Marine began laughing, and it is hands down my favorite part of this story, because somehow that man lived through an entire lifetime worth of shit before he turned 25, and he's now made it into the twilight years of his life with his sense of humor intact and that innate burning desire to be a fucking smartass that every military member I've ever met has. And now the story's gonna get weird. Whatever became of Wake Island.
I mean, I understand that, right? Nothing gives you perspective of life if you went through all this shit and return home, right? By that point, like, you would have, like, you are smart and like taking things lightly, right? Because you survived from where 99% might not survive. And in World War II, a lot of people not survive. I'm saying like they surrender, right, because of one mistake, but maybe because of that they're still alive, right? If they didn't surrender, let's say they killed those 900 people, what would have happened? US wasn't sending any reinforcement, more Japanese would have come and like use other tactics to kill them, and in the end they would have died. So at least by that mistake, by surrendering, at least they were alive by the end of it.
Itself, while it would remain under Japanese control for the duration of World War II, every time an American naval vessel drove past it, they would open fire on it with its guns, and they would routinely perform air raids on the island. Now, as fate would have it, one of those air raids on Wake Island would be the very first combat mission of a new pilot that joined the military at the ass end of World War II, and that pilot's name was George Bush. Don't worry, it's gonna get weirder. Returning now to the men as they were currently serving as prisoners of war.
He's a Barbara, as in Barbara Bush, his wife, okay.
Don't worry, it's gonna get weirder. Returning now to the men as they were currently serving as prisoners of war, the vast majority were held in POW camps in Japanese-occupied China. Of all the men held there, a single Marine would escape, and he would make his way all the way to northern China, where he would find a group of Chinese communist soldiers, also not super big fans of the Japanese at this point in time, and they would decide, hey, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, I'm gonna make sure this Marine makes it home safe, and that's exactly what they did. And just as that Marine was about to set off on his final journey home, he would receive a visit from those soldiers' leader, and that leader would wish him well on his journey and gift him with several very nice Chinese rugs. That leader's name was Mao Zedong.
What
the
the
deadliest
fuck?
human of all time, credited with killing somewhere between 40 and 80 million people. Yeah, the truth is literally stranger than fiction, and all of this happening, I have so many questions, but most important of all,
Okay, we have problem with statistics, humans, but when I think about it, is that really weird? Leader of those men was Mao Zedong, and of course he became leader of China later on. That's not that weird. The weird part is like, okay, those scenarios met, but then again, World War II was happening everywhere, scenarios were happening everywhere. Obviously, we would only hear about things like this. We're not going to hear about a guy who escaped from somewhere and didn't meet Mao Zedong, right? So even though you might feel weird, it's like, asking, oh, look at that, what are the odds you won lottery? Millions of others didn't. You're not interviewing them, are you?
one question I want an answer to more than anything. What do you think that guy did with the rugs? I mean, for real, on one hand, kind of weird to keep them, but on the other hand, the rug didn't do anything, and it's a nice fucking rug. You know what I mean? Okay, this video is getting out of hand. I have to end it. In conclusion, after Pearl Harbor, the commander of the Japanese Navy, Admiral Yamamoto, would write in his personal diary, Quote, I fear all we have done is awoken a sleeping giant and filled him with terrible resolve. And I personally find it ironic that the first time that his men would come face to face with that terrible resolve, the sleeping giant that they awoken, would be 3 days later at Wake Island, where 450 Marines, 70 Navy corpsmen, and 400 blue-collar construction workers stood together and halted the most powerful Navy on the planet in their tracks for 16 days. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. The best way to support the channel is go buy some merch at thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang, out. I'm gonna be honest. I probably would have kept those fucking rugs.
What'd you think of the movie Wake Island when you first saw it?
First thing, we didn't have a dog.
Yeah, that's number one.
And Brian Dunleavy, even though he was a good movie star, there was nothing real about the movie whatever.
A lot of war bond drives occurred at the movie theaters. People would come to go see the movie. They'd be so pumped up with enthusiasm and patriotism, they'd exit the movie theater and there'd be war bond sales right there, and people would buy war bonds, and it helped the war effort tremendously.
Yeah, Warbox, makes sense. In a way, that's PR type of way, right? To help the movement or whatever. Yeah. Oh, this is so insane. Waking up. I mean, that sentence, we have awoken a giant. That is so fucking true in every single way, even today. US is, let's just say, geopolitics and monopolies around the world kind of feels like paranoia way, right? They overdo things, certain things, because out of fear. Now, seeing the current conflicts, is that really paranoia or just like preparation, right? So, if Pearl Harbor didn't happen, would that happen? Would US become such a strong military power? I mean, obviously, they would have become a military power, but not in an influential way they are today, where they basically dip their hands everywhere, every matter, even if it doesn't concern them, just because anything that happened in the world might affect us. That's their mentality, US is. That wouldn't have happened if Pearl Harbor didn't happen. Because World War I, World War II, both of time, like, yeah, it's not our thing, we'll stay away. And something like this always happen. So before World War III starts, they're like, fuck it, we'll just be ready, because we'll have to be involved. That was their mentality. So that quote is right. We awoke on a sleeping giant, and you did. Right, well, there was 450 Marines versus the Imperial Japanese Navy, Wake Island. Yeah, that is so true about the prisoner thing, right? Like all the things the Japanese are, oh, that's dishonorable. So you might as well not be human. And everything they do after that, all the Japanese story. All the thing Japanese did in China in certain cities, right? I don't want to think about it, right? All the horrible shit they did. Because I don't know, they think like somebody surrenders, they're not even human or something. If you don't have honor, you're not human or something. That's just fucked up. Right, well, if you like my Rick, subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you next time.